brilliant military man, became president. But we had in there right after World War II, James, Operation Paperclip too,
Yes.
which, in a sense, we imported some of the most ruthless people from the Nazi regime into our country, uh,
Mm.
uh, pampered them and gave them, you know, a really good situation. Some of them probably should have been sent to the Nuremberg trial, but it was all about wanting to mine the knowledge that these people had. I think of Warner von Braun, who was the headed up the missile program here in the United States, and which led, I guess, to the moon landing. If you really want to take it, that's one step at a time. But
Yeah.
this knowledge, underground, underreported knowledge, that it's like it's there right in front of us, and I like to use the term hidden in plain sight because it's there. And do you think that it's just that human beings themselves just want to believe that that everything's in a sort of this nice wrapped package, and that they feel safe in this nice wrapped package, and they don't really want to allow any knowledge in to their minds, even though it's there, that might disrupt their perceived safety?
I think it's I think it's partly that, Dwight, and I believe it's very complicated. I think the human brain naturally doesn't want uh, mysteries that don't have an end to them. So if we go to the movies, we don't really like it if the third act doesn't tie up neatly. Like Hollywood has experimented with all sorts of endings, and we like a pretty clear resolution. Um, and I think that's the same with these sorts of things. For example, we get given narratives. Now, the Western powers, Britain, America, and even down here, Australia and New Zealand, we all had a tremendous amount of goodwill after World War II, and along with Russia, we'd all done the right thing. And I think that was a great point in history to defeat the fascists. And but the narrative was we were the good guys, and that was carried forward. And I don't know, I don't think it's that clear cut anymore. I think it's really, really getting confused. And I will admit, in all my research, I don't know. I don't pretend to know everything or even most stuff, and I think particularly now in 2017, it's getting more and more confusing. So it's good to go back in history and look at these events that since World War II haven't been reported enough. And I believe what you brought up there, Operation Paperclip, which was the something that Truman signed off in the US, but we also had Operation Matchbox, which is even less known in Britain, which was they were gathering Nazis, and some of them were sent down here to Australia.
Right.
And the Russians had their own program, so we're all grabbing these Nazis that supposedly were meant to be not war criminals, just scientists. So we wanted their expertise, and on the surface, I believe that that official argument rings. It sounds, yeah, that's fair enough. I've even spoken to Holocaust survivors because that's another area of research, and they buy that hook, line, and sinker, that they believe that the official argument was, well, that was to fight the Soviets. We had a Cold War going on. We had to do something, and the Nazi scientists were so far ahead of everyone else for whatever reason that we were all fighting for them. But I believe it goes deeper than that. I think fundamentally, if you look at the foundations of America, and I've lived in America, I've traveled about 40 states, and your country is one I really respect because it's based on the foundations of liberty more than any other country, personal freedoms. And I believe by doing Operation Paperclip, it wasn't just a dirty little secret. It's fundamentally letting in fascists and putting them in charge of major projects was something that had deep roots and spread, and was a philosophical blunder, and is very anti-American. And what's interesting is Truman signed a document to say there will be no war criminals, but the CIA and co got around that, and there were a number of people that had to change their names because they would have stood at the Nuremberg trial. And so you've got the worst crime of the 20th century, and you've got some of the masterminds behind that coming into all our Western nations, That there is something, once again, like Operation Northwoods. Operation Paperclip is something that should be widely reported. And what's interesting also is only about 50% of Operation Paperclip's documents have actually been declassified. We don't know how much further the whole thing goes. We don't know if even someone like Joseph Mengele, the angel of death in Auschwitz, we don't even know if someone like him was allowed to come into America at some point. We don't know, and so I would argue we can't just isolate it and say, okay, there were several hundred Nazis brought into our country and that's it. I think we have to look wider and say, well, putting them in charge of major, scientific experiments. It wasn't just NASA; they were all over the show, and including mind control, MK Ultra. They were floating around there too. That has very wide ramifications. That I believe the correct response when people hear Operation Paperclip shouldn't be so much, oh well, that's a shame. It should be, say what? What did you just say? My government let in Nazis. That's the way I react. What about you, Dwight?
Yes, I react the same way.